Remember the old days of Double Dare? The slime, the nose picker, the gorgeous Mark Summers? When I was a little kid, I was obsessed with being on the show. I used to beg my mom to take me to Florida so that I could have a chance. She never did because Florida. But when I got older, I did some research and it turns out that Double Dare was a lot darker behind the scenes than anyone could have possibly imagined. From banished games and crazy lawsuits, here are the darkest things that happened on Double Dare. When Double Dare was first starting out, nobody had any idea what the show was going to be like. Co-creator and executive producer Jeffrey Darby initially said, "I always wanted to put a live kid through a Rube Goldberg machine where they would be the pinball in the game Mousetrap." So clearly this show was bound to make a mess. Literally. With only $10,000 per episode to spend, the showrunners had to cut costs and do things on the cheap whenever possible. So naturally, certain things fell through the cracks. The show is designed to force children to embark on the longest, grossest, most unnecessary obstacle course in order to win prizes, which was usually fun, but definitely had its darker moments too. For example, did you know that one of Double Dare's initial obstacles was banished from the show by Nickelodeon? While the obstacles were still fairly new and advertisers were still incredibly nervous, the show introduced a brand new obstacle called Feather Pillow on the first day of shooting. But according to the members of the crew, the production staff called it Nightmare. That's because they had accidentally invented a game that no one could solve, and Nickelodeon was not happy about it. In the very first episode of the show, Feather Pillow was introduced as the first obstacle in the course to a live studio audience. It was basically a gigantic pillowcase full of feathers, and as with every obstacle course on Double Dare, the kids had to dig through it, pull out the flags, and hand them to their partner before moving on to the next one. Unfortunately, the producers forgot to put the flag in the pillowcase, and the very first kids who appeared on Double Dare lost the game spectacularly. Darby was quoted about the Nightmare obstacle saying, "That poor girl. She was crawling around amongst all these feathers looking completely sad and distressed that she couldn't get a flag." Obviously, if you're gonna have a game show on a kids network, you can't be sending children home crying right and left. The kids were allowed to try again, but still couldn't find the flag. On the third try, the producers practically handed the flag to them just so they could finish the game, and Nickelodeon execs were pretty pissed off. Advertisers were not going to stick around to pay money for airtime during a game show that was impossible to win. Director Dana Calderwood knew the show was in trouble and said, "That was the very first obstacle course run, and we were thinking, oh my god, we're about to make 65 of these and it's totally broken and doesn't work." Feather Pillow was banished from Double Dare, and producers were told that they were never allowed to bring that obstacle back to the show again. This presented its own set of problems. Not only was Nickelodeon growing increasingly unhappy with the show itself, inexpensive challenges like Feather Pillow were crucial to staying under budget for each episode. It seemed like Double Dare was already on thin ice with the network, until even more things started going wrong with the show. When the show took over the PBS station at WHYY in Philadelphia, producers tried to take every precaution they could to make sure that the floor was easy to clean up at the end of the show, but they never could have predicted just how messy and disgusting things would get. At first, they tried to pour a liquid plastic solution over the flooring so they could simply strip it off at the end of the day, which would have been awesome if it actually worked. But Double Dare didn't think about the fact that this stuff was normally used in industrial settings, like on an assembly line, and their crew was totally not prepared to handle it. Apparently, the mixture they poured was so toxic that the entire crew was jacked up on the fumes all day. They had no respirator and no fans, and they were shoved in a closed room. It's like if the elevator from the Haunted Mansion was filled with toxic fumes. Because the floor was so slippery, they couldn't even hose it down and had to resort to half-heartedly mopping whipped cream off the studio floor. On the very first day of filming, one of the camera guys actually slipped and fractured his ankle and spent the rest of the entire first season hobbling around the set with a big ol' cast. They finally figured out a solution to the slippery floors, which was to put giant bins at the front of the stage so that they could literally just squeegee the floor between takes. This was a practical way of handling things until about mid-afternoon, when the Philadelphia heat started cooking all that rancid whipped cream and baked beans. The show's announcer John Harvey told the AV Club that it smelled like death, and one of the prop guys was quoted as saying that you could walk in the studio early in the morning and you could just smell the sour buildup. You couldn't forget it. And that was by afternoon of the first day. The rest of the week was spent making sure none of the kids in the studio audience ralphed on camera during the show. Honestly, the smell of moldy Jell-O I could probably do, but spoiled baked beans and milk? Screw that! Most members of the crew even admit that they still can't look at whipped cream to this day. And apparently the baked bean smell was so rancid that the crew refused to clean it up. They actually had to hire one of those porta potty guys who suck the poop out. Only instead of poop, it was gross, slimy, expired beans that had been stewing under hot studio lights for 7 days straight. So gross, dude. At the end of season 1, everyone thought that the show would just be canceled, so no one bothered to clean the studio floor. When the crew returned for season 2, they unrolled the floor to start taping, and it was disgusting. Picture the worst mold you've ever gotten on a takeout container in your fridge, and multiply that by 8 billion hot studio lights in a long time between shooting seasons. Every crew member who helped clean the floor broke out into disgusting pussy blisters almost immediately. Mark Summers said, "It was like everybody had leprosy," which is exactly what you want when you're filming a kid's show. Come on, guys, junior high acne is bad enough without you giving children a biblical disease. But the real scary stuff happened when all this gross stuff mixed with that slippery studio floor. Although it's probably a miracle that this show has as little injury reports as it did, 2 major accidents happened that their insurance company just couldn't overlook. According to safety guidelines, each child had to have their parents fill out a form stating that they were medically healthy to compete in the obstacle course. You had to have a doctor sign off on a note and everything. But apparently, one kid's family failed to mention that their kid had osteogenesis imperfecta, aka that crazy glass bones disease. The kid had already broken 17 bones before he came on the show, and when he fell during obstacle 2, his bone went right through his arm. Mark Summers had to immediately leave the studio so he wouldn't puke on the kid. Luckily, there was a nurse standing by, but Nickelodeon execs were not happy. The next injury that happened was truly one of the craziest I've personally ever seen in my life. Mark Summers said, "We had an obstacle called sewer chute, which was you'd go up a ladder and then go down a ladder in a very narrow sort of plexiglass box, and the kid coming down fell backwards and it looked like he snapped his neck. I thought he was dead. If you see me on the course, all I say over and over again is, 'Are you okay? Are you okay? Are you sure you're okay?' We go into the control room after the fact, and this kid should not be alive. His neck snapped like I couldn't believe. Darby used to say when they're young that they bounce, but this one was scary as hell." The best part is, the kid's dad turned out to be a lawyer and threatened to sue Double Dare if they wouldn't give the kid a free TV. I don't know, man. $1 million lawsuit winnings from Nickelodeon or a Zenith from the 80s. I'm gonna take the money every time. But that wasn't the only time Nick almost got sued. Apparently, after Mark Summers jokingly bit into a packing peanut on the show, another lawyer parent contacted the show and told them that they were suing because, quote, "My kid started eating styrofoam peanuts because he saw Mark Summers do it." And that's why all Nickelodeon game shows started using the phrase, "Don't try this at home." Double Dare finally paid up when a woman Mark Summers pied in the face sued the show, claiming that the incident left her with zero confidence and men were no longer attracted to her. Call me crazy, but I feel like men find it more attractive when you can take one to the face. That was way dirtier than I expected it to be, but you feel me, right? Nickelodeon settled with her for a cool 25 grand in exchange for her dropping the lawsuit, and honestly, I'm glad they did. If you can't handle a pie in the face, you're just not cut out for slime time, babe. At least that's what I tell myself every night before I fall asleep. These are the craziest, most messed up things that I learned about Double Dare behind the scenes, but I want to know if there's anything I missed in the comments. For more videos that ruin your childhood, click to the left of my face to check out my other features. We're also on Roku now, so you can watch me on TV just like how I used to watch Double Dare! Although, I totally get it. I'm nowhere near as cool as Mark Summers.